Usually when I get to the end of my talk, no one asks questions, so I'm going to interrupt the questions first. That way. All right, anybody questions? All right, so I'm going to count on all of you to have at least one by the time we're done. Tell me if I need to speak up a little, because I tend to be a little soft-spoken.
Speak up a little. There's a bunch of old people in here.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about diversity, and I want to preface it a little bit, because when we talk about diversity, it can be really expansive. When you talk about diversity, it can be sexual, gender, but it also tends to, in its most traditional sense, talk to race or ethnicity, culture. I'm not going to talk about that specifically, the gender and sexual part, because some of the data that we're going to be discussing from the Harris Poll, census data, and Pew data isn't really segmented properly and doesn't allow itself to be analyzed in that way. So when I talk diversity, it's ethnicity. So the U.S. is a beautiful melange of backgrounds. We don't always get along, and whether you agree with the news or not, consensus or not, generally speaking, for the most part, we're actually doing okay when it comes to coexisting, especially when you take a look at all of the different races that tend to overlap and intersect. Usually when we're dealing with different and diverse populations, there's simply just one war. We've had the Civil War, fought Jim Crow, and the Union still exists, regardless of what some of our friends in town might lead you to believe. Don't get me wrong, we have a way to go when it comes to equality and the dismantling of legacy racist power structures, but for the most part, we haven't seen overt mass genocide. In fact, we see cross-pollination, cultural mixing, adoption, and in some cases, we're not exactly quite sure. We tend to move generally in the same direction as a whole, regardless of social stratification. The majority or the general population, though not always indicative of outliers, sure as hell can give us an idea of what most people believe. And when all things are equal, people gravitate to similar views. This also allows us to make generalizations like most millennials are familiar with things like hip-hop. Most, if not all Americans, support the, I think it's like 60%, believe that we should be legalizing marijuana versus less than half supporting the war. One of the larger generalizations that can be made is the drop in Christianity. Normally I get a little hesitant when we start talking about the nuns, because the nuns tend to be a conglomerate, a cumulative number of atheists, agnostics, and just people that have given up on God. It's the nuns versus the duns. And when we talk about the duns, truly those people who are done with religion. And for a long time, we haven't been able to have the real conversation on what does the atheist or the secular movement or secular people look like in general when it comes to the U.S. and U.S. population. Christianity coupled with the rise is in not just the nuns, but that specifically identified as atheists, agnostics, saw a massive increase. We're looking at about a 6% increase, and we're talking about potentially a quarter to a third of the U.S. population being atheists. Even I'm the skeptical skeptic couldn't deny that shift. Rejoice, Americans are leaving the church, and they are increasingly referring to themselves in secular terms. Nearly 6 points. But guess what? The majority of them. All right. Okay, so a few months ago, there was a CNN special on atheism. Did anyone catch it? It's the special, right? Right, very average, and it was kind of black. Okay. There was a furor over the fact that there was a white male-dominated program, leaving what felt like the last 5 minutes or so for a woman at all, almost immediately. Right? The blogosphere and social media was on fire. They went absolutely crazy. The special didn't show the diversity that is represented in the movement. People were mad, pissed. They didn't understand why. Because when you go to conferences, you see a few of us there, right? Most people have heard, if you're very active in the movement, of organizations like Black Non-Believers, Hispanic Secular Humanists, Hackers, so you see the names, Magisa Thomas, Jim Bay, etc. So you see all of this, and you're like, wait, we're not all white. I see them out there. All right, so I wrote a piece called CNN Fails to Capture the glorious diversity that exists in the atheist mind. People were really mad. Because although we see some level of diversity in the movement, the new atheist movement, if we're going to call it that, does not necessarily reflect the greater demographic. Atheism, so big atheism, a select few of self-selected individuals who identify as the atheist movement. We estimate, again, 1 in 4 Americans are atheists in the general population, but most atheists don't read atheist blogs. They don't like this. They don't attend atheist conferences. They don't enter debates. They just exist. They're out there. When I wrote the article, everyone flipped out. After all, there are Black and Latino atheists, but how exceptional is that? They are the exception. So what did the Pew survey say about ethnic diversity when it comes to religion? This is still the average. Everywhere else saw a drop in religion, except there. It's flat. It's just the same. There's relatively no change. Regardless of how many groups you see and how many people you might see, it's not represented in the greater atheist community or the general population. Even with the increased visibility. It's frozen. No. All right. So this is the error survey. It's a little dated, waiting for the 2016 results to come out, but I expect this to actually be the same. This is one of the numbers that I pay attention to. We take a look at Gallup, we take a look at Pew, but where is it? This is the number, right? It has absolutely certain belief and value. This is where the general population is, and it's trending lower. This is where the African American community is. The Latino community is basically the same, still there. Same thing with belief in angels and demons. This one is more worrisome because nearly 80% of African Americans say religion is truly important. So that's what we're actually combating. It's a little different. There's a larger diverse picture here. Hispanics have grown as a share of all three religious groups, but that's to be expected overall. The reality is you have more Hispanics, so you're going to see that represented in a lot of different places. Everywhere but atheists. Let's take a look at what they're getting right. We've seen an increase in diversity all across. except in big M minorities. One thing to note is that by 2030, between 2030 and 2050, and this is why it's kind of important, that assuming the demographic continues to trend the direction that it is, when you say that America is becoming less secular, if the minorities become the majority and they're not less secular, you have now introduced a potential gridlock when it comes back to separation from church and state, right? Especially, and it almost doesn't matter what party you're talking about, because when you take a look at the blue party, Democrats, when you take a look at how many minorities are represented in the Democrats, oh yes, there's significantly more, but how many of them are religiously conservative? How many of them have the preface of Reverend Doctor, et cetera, et cetera? So you're introducing, again, religious privilege. It's actually one of the reasons why I do what I do, is to try and curb them. So what are they doing wrong? All right. So theological warfare. Right? We know that the population as a whole just doesn't really like it. Religiously sanctioned discrimination. Right? They're on the wrong side of history. Even many of their pastors realize this, but it is still a wedge point for them. Unpopular stances on politics, right? Church and state. They believe that this is a Christian nation. If you press most of them, depending on the survey that you look at, most of them don't actually believe that. There's a lot, it tends to be the leaders, the most vocal, the 1% that have the attention of the media that propagate what people think they feel. Attack on education and science. They're still not staying out of the schools. False persecution. Now, this one is important because I say in the U.S. because Christians are actually getting persecuted outside of the U.S. People are being killed for their religious belief. When you take a look at what's happening here in the U.S., false persecution or their persecution is not being able to expand or spread the way that they'd like to, or us saying, no, we're not going to convert. That's the reason. False persecution. And then we have same-sex and marriage equality. We have an interesting anomaly in the data where the general population seems to be trending towards favoring same-sex marriage. In almost 63%, depending on the survey, margin of error, 63 to 68% across the board, regardless of religion. So sure, we support same-sex marriage. But if you listen to the press, if you listen to media, if you listen to the religious leaders, no, same-sex marriage equality is not going to happen. Again, it's more of an artifact of who has the microphone. But what do they get really right? People are leaving Christianity, except they're not really leaving the churches in the African American and Latino community. Why is that? The church has a lot of staying power. One of the heavy ones that I like to talk about is socio-political activism. It's the lifeblood of many churches, regardless of race. Getting out there on the front line, mission work, charities are integral to who they are. They try to ease and suffer. They are making a difference in people's lives, and that has a halo effect. People are going to be attracted to that, regardless, because though they may not be altruistic always, people like to at least believe or appear that they're altruistic. That's one of the reasons they hate the idea of separation between church and state fundamentally, because church-run government entities would be better for Christians, and being Christian, although a false equivalency, does not equate to necessarily doing good in the U.S. So be good for goodness sake, or just be Christian. Sure, there's often a cost associated with that altruism, a Bible verse or a sandwich. But who here has actually ever been really hungry? If you understand hunger, if you understand pain, you understand suffering, you'll trade it. You also know that we also know where they stand on political issues. Even with groups like the SCA, atheists don't have a political voice. And politics are intrinsic to people's lives, whether they believe it or not. It is. And when the right to vote was challenged in the 60s and even now, the church is walking from life. That engenders fealty. Social issues. Not a big one. I don't know whether it's the intrinsic role of religion in defining race or just the necessity for action, but we still see a tremendous amount of really leadership from the church in social issues. I can't stand Billy Graham, don't like his son either, Frankie Graham, but he had a relationship with leaders like MLK and challenged segregationist ministers. In Ferguson, the Graham ministries were out there counseling people. Now, I believe they should have been counseling police officers as well, but they were out. They had real presence. They were calling for calm, but they were also calling for justice. That's something we don't tend to lend our voices to, not in the free thought movement. For many groups, it tends to just be an issue of scope creep. That's not my job. The church is a little different. Diversity workshops and focus. Race has often been problematic for the church. Most segregated hour in America, I think everyone's heard of it, is churches across America. They've heard it too and working on it. According to Lifeway's research, 85% of church pastors believe their churches should be more diverse and should be doing something about it. 15% report more than one predominant ethnicity in their churches, with an additional 20% actively recruiting from outside their primary demographic. That's actually important. The research study also found that 91% say churches should reflect the racial diversity in their community, and 79% believe their congregations look very similar to the people in their neighborhoods. People build where they believe there's fertile soil. So we can default to the argument, except we know that missionaries change the landscapes. We have no separate missionaries. Churches do missionary work. Almost every Protestant council out there or conference has a task force, a board, created initiatives to address mosaic issues. I'll share something that hit me when working on this, and do this a little early. We've gained tremendous ground over the past 10 years or so. The first meeting of the Mosaic Networks, which is a great initiative that the churches have put out there, they went from about 30 people to about 1,000 people. Pastors are more aware of the need of diversity, and they're no longer trying to convince them that you need diversity. The question is shifted to how. And then Transformation Church, something that we've been talking about again in the atheist community is how do we talk to people, right? How do we make sure that we're addressing their needs, their issues, the churches are addressing it with their sermons. I threw something up there that I personally don't like. It's true. It's the prosperity gospel. It's a walking, evolving lie that people buy into. The Olsteins have made millions doing it. Same thing with TD Jakes and most Creflo Dollar, right? It's all about the prosperity gospel, the prosperity principle. Sure, they lie to people to make them feel good, but that's not the only thing the prosperity gospel brings. It brings hope. False as it may be, when you're struggling and in pain, you need to find a way to bring people hope. It's not just the anesthetic, it often serves to bridge people in times of crisis. That's why so many studies show the positive effect of belief when in crisis, medical crisis in particular. And minorities tend to find themselves in crisis very often. I'm going to do this with you. Can everyone see this? Can anyone see what that number is? Okay, good. Okay. Okay, so for the most part, you all can see it, right? And stop saying you're colorblind. Stop saying you're colorblind. Stop saying you don't see race, you don't see color. It exists. The church actually gets this. They see race, they understand it, especially given that they profited from it for so long. The ideas of tribes, skin color, etc., entrenched in the Bible. So there's no new vocabulary for them. They don't have to introduce any new ideas. They were also very important in maintaining the status quo, doing Jim Crow, etc. But when challenged, they fell. Now they understand. Even today, the conversation on race is being held outside by the reps. We just don't have enough secular involvement on the front lines in what appears to be a major hesitation to even involve ourselves in these issues. Their privilege allows them to see the world through a unified worldview, though distance may play a mediating factor. I am human. I see my fellow humans. But I know how many of my fellow humans have treated people like me and vice versa. We've got to be able to label the problem and attack it, not deny that the different worlds exist. We tend to live not just in different worlds, but on different sides of the track. So how do we fix it? I'm not advocating that we start creating churches for atheists, but there are things that we can learn from those churches. I think I just went over the majority. It creates wonderful opportunities for us to engage with people on very different levels. And yeah, I crossed that one out because that's not that awesome. Okay. It is about getting very uncomfortable. This could be the single biggest resistance to change. This is also the key to understanding one another. Be comfortable being uncomfortable. Get comfortable being uncomfortable, because you're going to have to get uncomfortable with me to make a difference at home, at a march, where yes, people may look like me, but they won't care about your race or beliefs if they see you there. You just have to be there. This is also where you can make the most impact. You'll have to get uncomfortable with me, get dirty in really uncomfortable and foreign parts of town if you're going to change it. The churches realize this. You'll have to figure out how to build community by being visible to me, but invisible to them. Because what we don't need is more white saviors. We just need you to be there. That's actually one of the single most important things about being an ally, knowing how and when to get out of the way. You're going to have to collaborate with uncommon allies. Interfaith is kind of nasty, makes me icky, but the reality is they're there. If you're going to make a difference in people's lives, you may have to partner, especially given, although it's 1 out of 4, you're not out there today. You're not seen. Atheists are still invisible. and at least look like you're doing good. That's one of our biggest PR problems. They don't see us out there. They don't know that we're out there. How often do you get hit with, well, where's the last atheist charity? Where are the atheist hospitals? Of course, my response is they're everywhere, but no one knows. Make social issues your issues. If you consider yourself a humanist, why wouldn't you? Right? We're not saying humanism is specific to a specific race or a class or a color. So if you understand that social issues or inequality is a human concern, and it just happens to be different than yours, why wouldn't you make it a priority too? If you're looking at easing human grieving and suffering. Acknowledge the differences that exist between us. They're there. Educate yourself on why those differences exist, why they keep us separate. Most important, really just do something. So, started out with anyone have questions? Anyone else have questions? Come on. I got it before I started.
Questions and comments. I would also add to your list, just come out. I'm very out, and I think I'm a pretty nice person, and I like people to see that atheists are nice people. That's
Anyone here ever come out to someone and the conversation goes something like, but you're such a nice person.
Sometimes it goes that well, sometimes it goes worse. With relatives, it can go particularly badly. But and the question that I had was, how to there's a long-standing history that influences people's choice of religion. And it feels like for a lot of Black people, their only hope at the beginning of their history in this country was religion. And it was given to them, obviously, but that was all they had. For whatever reason, it was all they were allowed, really. And I know people, good friends, who cling to that because of that. A friend has a Bible that her ancestor was taught to read from by his master illegally. I mean, this is so important to her. And she hears me, we talk, and it all makes sense, what I'm saying. Doesn't matter.
It doesn't, because for African Americans, race and religion are intertwined, right? It is part of their tradition, it's part of the culture. That's what makes it so very difficult to uncouple them. You can't just, but look, your God, your religion was given to you by your ancestral transfers. How can you continue to submit? And you do wind up defaulting back to, well, my grandmother, just like that story, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, etc., they used religion to meet. The churches were where they were allowed. If you were allowed to read anything, it was the Bible. If you were going to be allowed to meet by yourselves and supervise, it was going to be the church. And when you have identity that's been stripped from you, right? Because especially with African Americans, you are often forced to try and cohere your own reality. You're trying to figure out who you are, and outside of creating and crafting your own narrative, you're going to use what was given to you by tradition, is exactly what we're beginning to ask ourselves now with what defines being black anymore if you can change your hair tan, call yourself black, and then pass yourself off as black, right? I mean, she didn't have the religious piece to it that we know of. We don't know. But is that really what black is? And for a long time, that's been defined for African Americans. This is what blackness is. This is what you're supposed to be like. And then when you take a look at the ability to save African Americans, specifically in the U.S., same thing with the Afro-Caribbean cultures, the analogy of Moses has long been used, whether it was Harriet Tubman, who was a black Moses, or when you take a look at the second Messiah himself, MLK. So again, the secular voices that were part of the civil rights movement have been muted. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about ARs. We don't talk about A4. We don't talk about really important names, like CU as well. We don't talk about really important secular names, secular voices, because those are often louder, more boisterous, and more famous, MLK reason.
This is just a matter of time.
It is a matter of time. It's a matter of time and cultures. And I think what we're seeing is a challenge to what defines what black culture is. And so the question of identity has to be analyzed as well. I've never had the level of conversations that I've had this weekend over this topic ever in my life. It's just never happened.
One more question. I can imagine that there are white cultures that are equally steeped in their religion and would have just as much trouble. Do you know? I'm trying to think with the Orthodox.
We started looking at Orthodox Judaism as well. When you turn your back on the culture, you also kind of sort of turn your back on race. It's not until the last 20 so years or so it's been acceptable to be, yes, I'm Jewish, but I'm culturally Jewish, so I may be a secular Jew. That has happened, and the hope is we can migrate to that eventually and say, yes, I'm.
But you have to completely abandon your culture as far as the larger culture sees it. And that's
difficult.
Huge.
It's difficult, which means that you've got to be able to show the alternative, right? Which is you need to show that you still can be black and not religious and normalize it. I haven't given up my race, my identity. I just get
So there are a number of African Americans in this country that have abandoned Christianity and become Muslims. So they were at some level, I think probably most of them were raised in a Christian setting and then they broke away from that. So they were able to see something about Christianity that didn't fit up with that, but that it was like the slave religion, that was imposed on them. And so do you have any insight on the black Muslim movement?
So we can talk about black Muslims, or we talk about Muslims specifically. Both of them have slightly unique.
Can you speak louder, please?
Yes. We talk about the black Muslims and the Muslims in general. And you're seeing a migration to both. Now, when it comes to black Muslims, right, Nation of Islam, it's actually very interesting. There is a sect of the nation called the Nation of Gods and Earth, the NGE, or the Five Percenters. The Five Percenters, if you look at and we don't know exactly what their numbers are, but they're very atheistic in nature. They don't actually believe in a supernatural deity. And that's kind of the way that the Nation of Islam was going. Initially, there was a fracture in, I want to say it was 1997 or so, where Louis Farrakhan jumped in and fully adopted more traditional Muslim values and beliefs. Prior to that, this idea of a non-corporeal God really wasn't there. And that was a true rejection of your master's religion. Of course, that was plagued with its own issues, such as the idea of separatism, Pan-Africanism, and bigotry, etc. So you had that. So it wasn't great, but it was an alternative. And you also see it with the various sects. The Black Israelites are a big sect. They've been on the East Coast and the West Coast. They've infiltrated a lot of communities, and they grow there with this idea of rejecting traditional religion and values. And yes, that was your master's religion. So you absolutely see that, especially with Black males who tend to feel disenfranchised, very disempowered, etc. So that you absolutely see with those. Then within the Muslim community, the traditional Muslim community, you see where Christianity just doesn't fit, Islam tends to pick up. And it gives them a level of empowerment that, again, they still don't tend to see in Christianity, but you see that with Islam. That's why you see so much of a rapid adoption in places like Africa.
Well, it seems like the Black Muslim movement had the benefit for the community of providing a certain structure and things that the Christian church traditionally had in that, but it had a very rigid set of rules about things, and usually a particular person that decided what those, or got the message what those rules were.
Two words that rang and resonated in the 50s with Elijah Muhammad, in the 60s, and Clarence X also in the 50s and 60s. And it's two words: Black Power. And that resonated with several truly oppressed and hunted Black men in the movement. So being able to liberate yourself using those two words was something that you had an entire generation never got. And so being fed that was extraordinarily lurid. Right? That's why it was able to grow so quickly. That's why you had Malcolm X, but it's like, almost overnight, you had a voice piece or a mouthpiece in Malcolm X, and the Nation of Islam actually did explode, right? You had people running in because it was so different than what was being said. Now, of course, you had the Black Panthers, Stokely Carmichael, and company that were on the colleges, and so you had almost a perfect storm going on that you don't see today, obviously. But you had a perfect storm and just fed in. It was the same message.
Well, is the movement increasing, or is it stable, or is it dwindling?
For Black Muslims specifically, the Nation of Islam, the numbers have varied. If you listen to Farrakhan's numbers, several hundred thousand. If you listen to what the government kind of says, you're looking at anywhere between 30 and 50,000, which makes it really small. The influence is still there, especially the influence on culture. They're not going away. They've been, whether it's Nation of Islam, Nation of Gods and Earth, the NGE, the Fruit of Islam, those organizations or those groups have become fixtures in popular culture, in Black popular culture. You can't walk into a music studio, for instance, or a hip hop station, and not be bombarded with it. Most people don't even know or recognize the language or the signs that they're there. They are there. Yes.
Yeah. Aside from yourself, obviously, who would you say are the voices now for the African American community for atheism? I know in the white community or in the community at large, you can think of Dawkins and Richard Harris, Sam Harris, and a whole list of others. But are there some icons? Are there some people who are really becoming visible within the black community?
There are. There absolutely are.
And how could one support them?
There are different organizations, and almost all of us belong or represent one organization or another. And we're all regionalized. So on the West Coast, we have people like Dr. Sikivu Hutchinson, who's very prominent speaker on the West Coast. He's professor of European Studies. I want to say UCLA, but I might be wrong.
Is there a web presence that one could go to easily and find out?
Because
this would be something, you made a point earlier in your talk that amongst the African American community, the free thought doesn't seem to be sticking or taking a hold. And as you pointed out, as minorities become majorities, then you're looking at an issue here of that's not tenable. So I would be very interested in learning how to be a better support for this.
Yeah, two points. The first one is when I used to talk about this issue, people used to listen and not be engaged all that much until I dropped that one fact. When you take a look at population demographics, what do you want your grandchildren, your children to be raised in? Right? I mean, we keep talking about a theocracy, and you look at the numbers and say, oh no, we're getting less religious, we're becoming more secular, and then 2030 is like, wait a minute, what happened? We can predict what's happening. We have the numbers today. So that's one. So I'm glad you asked that question. Second, there is a great website. It's the African American for Humanism website.
African
American for Humanism, AAH. And it's part of the Center for Inquiry. It was set up by the Council for Secular Humanism, and just about all of the regional or national African American leaders, including myself, are part of that council. You can usually find us through there. We have a speakers bureau that's listed there as well. And we absolutely take them.
So this comes up a lot at atheist gatherings, and it's almost as if we're saying, okay, so what can we do to invite or make it a more welcoming place for you and those people, so to speak? And that's a problem then, that it's something we need to do. And I think what we need to do is understand that we have a different life. We have a different history. We don't have to tell our kids to watch out for saying this or being here and doing that to nearly the extent that the African American community does. And I don't think a lot of us really understand what that means in terms of how do you relate to this other community.
This is. I've been tackling this question for about 5 years. How do you get there? And I touched a little bit on it, and it takes a lot of work. It really does. We need to. It's kind of hard to just show up at a local church where you might find the majority of African Americans, right? They say, "Hey, I'm here to help," and of course they'll look at you like, "What do you mean?" Like, "Oh, by the way, I don't believe in God." That conversation. Interfaith events are probably going to be the number one place for intersectionality and being able to have the kind of conversations that you need to have. Up in Dallas, what we do is we find these kinds of events, and we have people that are going to go out there. And I'll give you an example. We have the North Texas Food Bank, and it's a huge food bank. It processes food for several charities all over North Texas into Oklahoma. And they have an event called Full on Faith, where all church leaders, they volunteer their time, and they have groups that come out and package food and what have you. We found out about it and said, wait a minute, we got to be there. And a few years ago, we were actually the largest group there. I mean, we easily outnumbered them. And I still get emails from people back then, that want to talk to me about, hey, what else can we do together? Now, we were just there, we just showed up and just about everyone had an atheist t-shirt, or, as long as it wasn't too offensive, I was like, you just make sure this doesn't, F God or anything like that, and it'd be okay. Because those conversations can happen. A lot of those people didn't know what atheist meant. I actually got asked when someone saw my shirt, atheist, not kidding, what denomination is that? Right? So the level of conversation that happens there is amazing. And you're doing something together. You're doing good together. You don't necessarily have to get into the moral argument, the theological argument. So you don't have to do any of that. You're doing something together. They're going to question you. Most likely, you already know the answers to all of the questions, because a lot of us were, either ex-religious or know more about religion than many of our religious counterparts. I was Catholic and I was Muslim. So yeah, and I actually went to seminary as well. So yeah, I got it. But, be a resource, be there, be available, and you need to continue to go places. Like I said, you need to go places that you're not going to be comfortable. And they're going to see that you're not physically comfortable in those places. And that's okay. As long as you keep showing up. And that's where the change is going. Make it part of your humanism work to go places that make you uncomfortable.
Yeah, talking about helping others in different areas like that. There's wonderful opportunities right here in Austin. The Capital Area Food Bank is one. I try to go on Friday afternoons. The majority of volunteers, I was there Friday, 2 days ago. The majority of volunteers there are at least the ones I talked to, very strong Christians. Yes. And once, of course, I'm a pretty big mouth atheist. I think people that know me here know very overt.
Brother David.
Thank you. And once they know you're an atheist, it's a good point you made. They're very surprised. They don't understand that we care just as much as they do. Right? It's intrinsic to us to love and share. So just being there without any debates, just having presence there, actually caring for the needy people. That's what surprises the Christians.
For 5 years, I have made, and this is still one of my top 10 arguments, atheists have a PR problem. It just is a fact. We have a PR problem. When we have, unfortunately, when people think atheists, Richard Dawkins. and then we have the string of wonderfully talented, intelligent, but not always the most tactful individuals, right? And they're great. I'm a huge Hitchens fan, right? He helped actually shape me. And I think anti-theism has a place in this world, although I can't embrace it, right? Because I feel virtuous. I can't embrace anti-theism, not the way that, I can absolutely talk about the bad things that religion brings, but I can't fight the way that someone like Hitchens can, because you won't get invited to the next place where you actually get to change minds.
One more thing. I saw Hitchens on a debate with Al Sharpton.
Yes, love that.
Yeah, and I wanted to just I wanted to say, Hitchens, this is exactly what they want you to do. You're getting upset, you're flipping them off, you're saying an F-bomb. They are expecting you to say that. And we have to present ourselves as just as moral, ethical, kind humanists, building our atheism into a progressive philosophy of life, helping people with or without God belief. And so, I was saying to you all, when you see some of our kids that present themselves as I hate to say the word, and I don't want to judge that. I didn't know the man. I think he was an amazing man, but it's almost nihilistic or angry.
Yes.
That's what they expect us to be like. Most Christians, until you show them, and they're not going to know unless you talk.
Exactly.
You have to be able to talk to these people. Can we have amen?
Dovetailing with all of this, these paragraphs that have been flying around, this Foundation Beyond Belief,
Yes.
which is kind of that overarching umbrella church-like thing that the atheists need. I'm sorry. To my opinion, I agree. I am a bridge builder. I think we need that community. I think church does a lot of things right. Religion does a lot of things right. And so Foundation Beyond Belief provides that. And most especially of interest is this July, we are having I'm on the board, so I am a big fan, obviously. There's a Humanism at Work conference in Boston on the subject of Black Lives Matter. It is entirely about this very topic. And there are still places available. They are only allowing 100 people to attend if you want to go.
Where is it?
Boston.
Oh, Boston.
Yeah, that too, right? Anyway, Humanism at Work, Foundation Beyond Belief. It's an amazing organization.
I used to be very anti-foundation.
Beyond Belief.
Yeah. I used to be very, and I switched just like that in one conversation. And the reason I had my problem with the foundation was not the foundation itself. It allowed too many people to outsource their humanism. Okay, I just get this, donate money, and not volunteer. Until, of course, we introduced these volunteers.
Yeah, and there's also the Peace Corps like thing, and
which is fun.
it's amazing. It's our mission work that you were talking about. We have basically what the church's equivalent would be of a mission that is atheists going and making a difference.
Yes.
I'm interested in hearing about probably a difficult population for a lot of people to reach out to, and that's people who are incarcerated.
No, that's not difficult. That though.
Captive audience.
Captive audience.
Well, the reason it's relevant is, of course, that people of color are greatly overrepresented in prisons and jails. And the religious organizations, it's a place where the church and state separation is completely trampled. Most of the, volunteers come from a religious perspective, very usually extreme religious perspective. It's very easy to get a free Bible or a free Quran in prison. Lots of organizations happy to send you one.
That's actually it's one of the slides I dropped off. It's like, no one's going to want to hear about that. But you're right, it is a captive audience. I get prison mail occasionally. And sometimes it's a little terrifying, right? Because it's when we get out, we need to have a conversation about God. It's like, okay, well, 25 to life, I don't know. But I've also had inmates, people of color who've reached out, how do I start a secular group in prison, right? I mean, I want... unfortunately, many inmates will go with the Bible Christian, because it allows you the ability to do something else. And when you're there for a long time, whether it's, you're in the general population or you get to be away from the general population, a lot of times I would rather be in a room with a couple of people. Yeah, sure, we're talking about God. I can fake it. Right, but I'm at least away. It gives you an opportunity to just be away. And unfortunately, one of the problems that we have with prison administrations is they tend to favor those programs. Right, and we've been trying to fight that for years. CFI has a library, and there are 2 programs, I think, right now, where they are sending secular media into the church, into the prisons for those inmates that really want it. Because guess what? There's not a whole lot of God is not great in prisons. Tons of Bibles. So that's one of the ways we can help. CFI still has that program out there. They're always taking money when it comes to at least information into prisons. One of the areas that we have a problem with, and we've tried, and this is failed maybe about 5 or 6 places around the country, is actually getting into the prisons to have secular conversations the way that ministries do. We've had a couple of people go in undercover, with not bogus, but the Universal Life Church ministry stuff that you get online, and they've been able to go in there and have conversations and meetings and what have you, but they haven't been able to say, hey, I'm a secular celebrant or a secular whatever, and you have people that have a demand, and we're here to help them. Same thing with all kinds of counseling, right? We're just way behind the curve on that. But people are talking about it, and some initiatives are being started. Yes.
You said at one point that you were raised Catholic and actually went to seminary. I'd be really interested in hearing how you walked your way.
Seminary actually helped me walk away. It is one thing, if I were to make it really, really short, I was as religious as they got. I was in church 2 to 3 times a week. I grew up in New York, and a particularly violent part in New York, in Brooklyn, in the Brownsville area. People most know that area for, I guess the most famous person out of there is Mike Tyson. Right? So, not a great area. I think the literacy rate right now is 50%. Right? So about 50%. And for me, seeing people dying and the church being able to make them feel better, that was my lure to the church. I mean, in a matter of a day or two, you could go from burying someone to christening someone and bringing the community together and closer just like that. But what they taught me in Sunday school, which I eventually taught other kids, was not what I learned in seminary, right? So when we actually started to dig deep into what the Bible was really saying, when I started asking those questions, it was really good timing because I happened to go to a science high school, which was the first time I actually met anyone who had doubt. Met my first atheist. I mean, because we don't like to talk about it or admit it, but we're a segregated society. We really still are, right? And when I first got questioned on my beliefs, I was all about fighting the atheists and talking them down, teaching them exactly how wrong they were. Dug into the Bible, still couldn't answer the question, so I walked away from all this space. And then when I went to seminary, it was all about getting better at busting the atheists, and which meant that you have to be able to answer those questions, which meant that you're going to find out that there are no answers to a lot of those questions, or none that you want, and still be able to maintain your hold on faith. So I walked away from seminary. Now, before I went into seminary, I was having doubts on my Christian faith, and I moved into Islam because, of course, that's the rest of the story. If you just look at the timeline, and I went there, and my family was not at all happy with this idea, but at least I wasn't an atheist. So I did that for a while, and it wasn't feeling right. And so, of course, what do? Instead of walking away, you jump in head first and go, okay, I've got to grasp this. I've got to understand it. Seminary, you're the last shot. And when I started understanding the Bible, the councils and how it was really, it didn't take me but a few months. So I did about half my seminary class. They left too. Hence why you have the shortage of priests in the Catholic Church.
And I guess it all depends on what your objective is. Like with the community outreach, is the objective to make atheists more friendly, or is it to actually make a demographic shift? Because the goal is a demographic shift. I think it's the path that you just outlined, which is we need to put emphasis on education. We need to do something about student loans, get more people into the colleges, because, I came from creation background, 6,000-year-old planet, 6-day creation, and then I came back to my church so were you going to tell me about the microwave background radiation? Fine. It's just, when people, religion's greatest weapon is that they offer people hope, and it's like, if there's going to be any hope, it's going to be in this life. It's going to be other people coming to the rescue and helping you out. But if you're afraid of what happens after this life or I die, it's like the facts are going to stay the same. The T-Rex skeleton's still going to be there. It's not disappearing just because. Yeah. And so I think education is the key in many respects.
Have you heard of Inside Books? Do they have that in? No. Here in Austin, there's something called Inside Books, and it's a rubber meets the road sort of place for the prison problem that you're talking about. They accept book donations, and it's out of some warehouse downtown. It used to be rat infested, people living there who are essentially homeless, and they receive requests from prisoners for books. And the number one book they want is actually a dictionary.
Yes.
Anyhow, so you fill their request and give them books. So if you could give them a bunch of magazines from CFI or something. I'm sure. Yeah. But there's a place that you could have a pretty tremendous impact and be kind of under the radar even.
I used to be a member of a Roman Catholic church that did medical missions. We would set up clinics and do surgeries for free in mostly Guatemala, but some other South American countries. And one year, we could only get a Jewish surgeon, and the church canceled the trip. But it was mostly a humanitarian objective. So we weren't passing out literature, we weren't, and so that group identity got in the way of the humanitarian mission. And I just want to caution, I mean, it's important, we do have a PR problem as atheists, but we shouldn't be excluding people who aren't atheists in attempting to make a better, case for that.
I've got a great story. It was a few years ago. We had this wonderful, wasn't a billboard, it was an advertisement on a bus in Dallas. People were really angry about it. I mean, this one made it international news because the churches were about to boycott because, of course, they were going into minority neighborhoods. The number one user of rail and buses in Dallas was going to be minorities. And so they felt as if we were specifically targeted. And so there was this bus that was just going around, and it just had millions of Americans who were good without God. That was it. It was the biggest insult to them ever. Really? This? What did it say? I have to let you off. What did it say? Millions of Americans are good without God. That's it. Yeah. That's it. And they were going to boycott. What eventually happened, by the way, is they forced a hearing, and they would rather have kept us off the bus. So no religious or
philosophical statements on the bus.
Exactly. At all. They would rather. So that it was a win for us because hey, that's fine.
Yeah, that's right.
That's fine. Just don't do it. Right. But they hired, and this is what made the story just funny. So millions of Americans are good without God. Someone hired an advertising van, right? With just a billboard, just a driving billboard. God loves you, and would for all day long, every time that this bus would leave the depot, it would follow the bus. And so this one was absolutely hilarious. Yeah, it was hilarious. And one of my friends at the time,
I should have hired one that says, "No, he doesn't."
No, he doesn't. Right. So, but we reached out to the guy that was paying for the advertising and said, look, I'm sure we agree on a lot of things. This is absolutely ridiculous. And we found out that he actually has this little charity where he gives out to the homeless. I said, that'd be great. We have a charity down there as well. And could we just partner on something and try and peacefully resolve this? The only thing that we ask is no proselytizing. No. It was a non-starter. It's like, wait, you're not going to partner with us because we're not going to allow you to preach to people? Yeah, no, why would I do that? So yeah, it can be really, really difficult. Don't stop trying.